special teams, kicking game. You have some new news and notes that you've been following along from USC preseason camp.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing that I saw, first and foremost, was just a little note about Makai Lemon and how he'll be used. I think it's really interesting that, so it's Ryan Karchi, he's reporting that Makai Lemon has been the clear top punt returner for USC in camp. And then asked about Makai Lemon being USC's top wide receiver and punt returner, Lincoln Riley said punt returner is one of the most important things on the field. There's nothing anyone would do that would keep us from playing them on punt returner. So, two notes here. Obviously, and then another thing that I saw, just to kind of air it all out there, is a report that, the number 2 option is Zacharias Williams, who's also projected, to be a starter at wide receiver. Still, not quite as clear cut as Makai Lemon and Jacoby Lane, still in competition for that, but a lot of people think he's going to be the number 3 guy. So 2 guys that are predicted to start at wide receiver are, the 2 candidates to kind of return punts. And I just, it kind of caught my attention because I feel like there's always this debate about using your star players on special teams and, whether that injury risk is really worth the potential reward. No USC fan is going to deny that Makai Lemon is absolutely electric returning the ball, and we saw that a lot last year. And, he kind of ended up taking over for Zachariah Branch despite, the things that he did with the ball in his hands in 2023. So, and that's no small feat, of course. But I personally am a fan of it. I think that, you can't just be so afraid of players getting hurt all the time. Like Makai Lemon could get hurt, walking down the sidewalk on his way to practice. Like it's obviously the injury risk is a little bit higher when it comes to returning punts versus walking down the sidewalk. But I just think that in sports, I always get so frustrated, and this kind of carries over into other sports in terms of load management in basketball and players not trying in specific games that aren't quote unquote as meaningful by their definition. And I just think that I always get so frustrated with that because it's like, who says you are or aren't going to get hurt? I think Makai Lemon could get hurt returning punts. He also could get hurt at wide receiver. I think that if he did get hurt returning punts, like blaming it on Lincoln Riley using him as a punt returner would be kind of silly because like I said, he could get injured just walking down the street. He could get injured playing wide receiver. So I think that if it helps your team win and Makai Lemon's willing to do it, you should go for it. And so I'm a fan of it personally. Same thing applies with Zacharias Williams, obviously, if he ends up winning that job. But I'm curious if you have any additional or different thoughts on this, man.
2 things. One, I would say is that, let's see if, Zacharias Williams can develop into a good punt returner so that you don't have to ask Makai Lemon to do this exclusively or even primarily. The other thing is, if you're going to have Makai Lemon do it only in high leverage situations. If USC's up 2 touchdowns, then you don't have Makai Lemon return punts, right? Then there is no need to subject yourself to that injury risk. But if it's, a 10-10 game at Illinois, 4th quarter, you need something. Well, then, of course, you go to Makai Lemon. And, of course, you invite the possibility that your most skilled offensive player can get the ball in his hands in a different way other than the passing game or a set play on offense. But if you're leading by 14, 17, he has no business returning punts. If a game is well in hand, or if the offense is playing really well and there's no acute need to get a long return, then you should sit. So, it's really a lot like managing a pitching staff in baseball, that you use guys in high leverage spots. You try and save them, right? You don't just run them into the ground. You don't overextend them or overexpose them. You use them in the right moments. So that, and having Zacharias Williams being, a competent, solid, quality plan B, those 2 things I think flow together. Because obviously, if you don't have a good plan B and you have a guy who is fumble prone, we've seen it with plenty of special teams units. The backup just can't cut it. Then you have to ride your number 1 pretty much all the time. So having the plan B is really important. Provided that exists, in USC just needs to be mixing and matching with Mekhi Lemon. All right, so special teams more broadly is something we've just been talking about, but now the kicking game specifically, Ethan, your news and notes on that particular front.
Right. So just another quick quote that I saw that really caught my eye. Obviously talking about new USC kicker Caden Chittenden. And so a quote here from special teams coach Ryan Dowdery, where he says that he understands that field goal kicking has been one of the weaker spots the last few years. USC fans know that all too well, obviously. And then he went on to say, Trojans' new kicker, Caden Chittenden, stood out for the big kicks he made in games as a freshman. Another quote that I personally just absolutely love to see. I think I've watched quite a lot of college football, NFL football in recent years. Jake Moody of the 49ers is someone who comes up in particular. Watching that Texas ASU game that I mentioned as well, like there's clearly some kickers on very high level teams that must be very, very talented in practice and, or in fact are very talented in practice, but don't, honestly just can't cut it in those high leverage moments. Like they don't have the mentality. It genuinely gets to them and they're not able to kind of get over that. And that's not really something that you can teach or practice, right? Like you can teach and practice kicking over and over and over again. But if a player just can't, really rise to the moment and can't get over that mental block, that's difficult. And I think that we've seen that a little bit at USC the last couple of years. And so it's great to hear that, that kind of intangible thing that you can't exactly teach is something that they really prioritize with Caden Chittenden. It's something that I think from youth sports on up is just so true is, you have to trust and you have to develop players who can perform in games. Like performing in practice and performing in games is something else entirely. That's why, sometimes in situations like you talked about, you need to let your backups get reps. You need to, just prepare players for high leverage situations, because it really is a different thing. Players can be practice superstars, and then as soon as 80,000 opposing fans are watching them, they can't kick the ball from 20 yards away anymore. So I'm just glad that they kind of picked up on that with him. I'm glad that that's something that they prioritize. And I mean, he was essentially the best kicker in the entire Mountain West last year. So, it's not like they're saying that about some unknown prospect. He was a great, great kicker. So I'm hoping to see him make some big kicks, because I think that they're going to need him to.
Yeah, to me, and people can disagree on this, and that's fine. Like, I welcome debate on this. Give me a kicker who's automatic inside 45, even if that means he doesn't have a big leg and, might not be reliable from 52, 53, 55. I want the guy who, when you drive inside the 30-yard line, you're getting points. Like, that is the idea of football, that you're driving down the field. If you drive far down the field, you don't quite get in the end zone, you've earned 3 points. 3 points which, if you bank them over the course of a game, they'll add up. We talk about, coaches who go for it or don't go for it, like, Dan Lanning of Oregon, most notably, passing up chip shot field goals that bit him in the backside against Washington 2 seasons ago, not having those 3 points. And Oregon's field goal kicking, very weak in a lot of recent seasons. And, there's the constant debate about, you go for it, do you kick the field goal? And, my philosophy of just on that point is, you bank field goals early so that you have them late. Obviously, there are times to go for it, but the value of 3 points, in my mind, has been a little bit undervalued recently. It's kind of like in baseball, how analytics, valued the home run so fully, and in that process, discounted the value of putting the ball in play and not striking out. The Brewers and Blue Jays and other teams are doing really well, not because they're going for the home run and the uppercut and the exit velo. It's because they're putting the ball in play, kind of returning to baseball's roots. And I think football, there's a similar thing where the valuing the analytics has gone so far in one direction that people have forgotten, whoa, having 2 or 3 field goals in your pocket over the course of the first 40 to 45 minutes of a game. It's good to have those 3-pointers on your ledger sheet, on the scoreboard going into the fourth quarter. And if you're passing up like 2 or 3 field goals, maybe you go for it once, but you need to be kicking a few field goals so that you have points in the fourth quarter, so that you're down 6 instead of 10, so that you're down 2 instead of 8, So that's my philosophy in terms of how you approach field goals. But then in terms of a field goal kicker specifically, give me the guy who's going to reward you for driving the ball down the field inside the 30, inside the 25. Give me the guy who's going to be, 12 of 13 inside 42, 43 yards, even if that means he's going to be 1 for 5 over 50, because over 50, the offense didn't drive down the field enough. I'm not going to lay that on the kicker. I want my kicker to make the kicks he's supposed to make, and that is where USC has fallen short with Dennis Lynch, with other kickers in recent years. Far too many field goals under 40, 41, 42 yards have been missed. So that's where I come down on the conversation. Ethan, is there like a yard line or a distance you feel like needs to be the Mendoza line where, anything underneath it, you just have to be pretty much automatic? Where do you draw your line?
I think 45 is pretty good. I think, and also like automatic on extra points. I think that was like the one thing that Dennis Lynch was pretty good at, was making all of his extra points. It, was the actual field goals where he struggled. So I just think it's, you got to make all your extra points, and then you have to like 45 and in, and then going back to this, like regardless of the situation, like you need to be able to make a 30-yard field goal, when you're playing Northwestern and half the stadium is full, and you need to make a 30-yard field goal when you're playing Oregon and, they're screaming 100 plus decibels in your face. Same thing with Nebraska and some of these other places that really pack the fans in. Like, you just need to have become, so automatic and so unaffected, I guess, by the outside noise and the eyes and stuff, that a 30-yard field goal is a 30-yard field goal, regardless of if you're on the practice field or if you're, in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I just think that's going to be the key. And that's why I like to see quotes like this.
I would just add one final note about, the mental game of place kicking. I'm a big tennis fan. There's a seminal book on sports psychology, not just tennis psychology, but sports psychology, The Inner Game of Tennis, by a guy named Timothy Galway, W-E-Y, not A-Y. If you haven't read it, this is a book that sports psychologists and coaches throughout the decades, 51 years since that book was first published, have used. And it just gets into how mental sports are. And so like the tennis example is, it's easy to hit an ace, big first serve at 1-all in the first set. You're just settling in the match. You're just beginning. You're fully physically fresh. The weight of everything isn't nearly as consequential. But can you hit a serve at 5-6, 30-all, right near the end of the set? You've been on court for an hour. You have to win this set against Novak Djokovic or Carlos Alcaraz. Can you hit the big serve then? And that's really the parallel with field goal kicking. Can you thing that you do in practice all the time, can you do it when it really counts, when all the pressures in the world is on your shoulders, when all the eyes in the stadium are on you? That it's the mental game. It's not a matter of physical prowess. It's a matter of being the mental fortress to be able to handle those kinds of